it will catch people off guard because a lot of people do not test like these niche matchups, especially in metas as wide as this.
Hey guys, just a quick reminder that this is going to be the last video that's eligible for the giveaway that's going on. If you're subscribed to the channel and like and comment on any of the videos posted from May 12th to May 19th, that is any of these videos, then you are eligible to win these sleeves. I am doing global shipping on these. One winner will be selected to get all of these sleeves. The winner for this giveaway will be chosen before the next upload on this channel. Thank you for all of your support, and I hope that you enjoyed this one. Make sure to check out the last All Blue episode if you haven't already. Let's get into it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of the All Blue. I am Yonas, and we are joined again with Hrvoje and Kai. Three people, all from different regions, kind of coming all together to bring some fun content for everyone. This is going to be the second episode. We didn't actually introduce the concept behind the All Blue last time, so hopefully this is going to be a really fun concept. Today, we're going to spend a lot of our time talking about the current EB02 meta that's existing in the English meta that we have, kind of talking about what our impressions are going to look like, what ideas that we might potentially have in this current meta game, and stuff like that. Starting off with you, Kai, how are you feeling today? I know it's pretty early for you, but I want to
Yeah, I
ask you.
mean, I just woke up 15 minutes ago. For me personally, obviously, I didn't get to play in EB02 with the ban list in place, so it was just a lot of Blue Doflamingo, a lot of Black Teach, and therefore a lot of Green Purple Luffy. So I'm kind of excited to see today what you guys have in mind for interesting picks and how the meta might be different from what we had.
Yep. How about you, Hrvoje? I know it's pretty late, pretty after midnight for you, but are you
Yeah.
excited about EB02?
Yeah, quite excited. Honestly, this hasn't been like the OP10 before EV2 has not been the nicest format to me. Like you can tell when I'm quiet on Twitter, I'm not really doing well, results wise. But my friends are. Like Luca won the Barcelona regional this weekend. But in EV2, I'm hoping to turn it around a little bit. Europe doesn't have as many events as I believe NA does for the format. I think we only have one Treasure Cup and one regional, but still, I prefer these formats where there's like a defined best deck, which I believe Green Purple Luffy is going to be. So yeah. And how about you? I know you already
Yeah.
have the experience with the deck, so
Yeah, I have a bunch of familiarity with the EB02 Green Purple Luffy deck, but I played it in the OP11 format when I was in Japan with Kai and you in the 3v3, and that was a super fun time. But it's a different format. There's different things you have to worry about, so it's a little bit more contextual compared to what the OP11 looked like, and I think the deck lists are going to look significantly different. So um, I'm excited to talk about it. Before we kind of talk about the meta that we expect to see in NA, do you guys want to talk about what we have seen in the previous metas that have existed in both Japan and in China? Kai, do you happen to have any information about any Japan events for EBO2? I know there's like the main Japan finals that was EBO2, or do you remember anything else from there?
Right. So, I always enjoy kind of like history because at least currently without simultaneous event or simultaneous release, we have a situation where the Asia side gets the sets earlier, so we have to discover the things kind of on our own. We don't really have NA to pull from and whatnot. And Green Purple Luffy was one of those really unique decks where even until and after release, no one expected the deck to be good. People just looked at the deck, it looked bad, they didn't try it. And the few people who did try it realized that it was good. So it was this weird thing where EB02 was exactly the same as EB01, except there was a big spike in NL players, which we can talk about a little bit because it got a nice new SR. Um, Green Purple Luffy exploded out of nowhere. Everything that was not Green Purple Luffy went down, and effectively it was just OP10 plus Green Purple Luffy, but we had this new meta deck. The only big tournament that we had in, or the only tournament that we had in Japan in EB02 was the Japan Finals, but obviously very important tournament. So it was interesting to see such an important tournament in such a unique meta, I'd say.
Mhm. Yeah, I loved seeing a lot of the deck lists. What like when it's only one big format or one tournament in a format, a lot of people come to different conclusions. Kind of notably, a lot of the decisions that people chose that I thought were very interesting in the Green Purple Luffy deck was whether they like to play the OP08 breakthrough card Electrical Luna, and whether some lists like to play the 2-cost Foxy Chopper as a blocker as well. Um, like I did not consider those cards the first time I even thought about that deck, and those were like super like really interesting cards that people played. Hrvoje, like, did you when you watched the Japan finals or you saw the deck lists, did all the deck lists look interesting in terms of like those tech cards? Did you think they were like super interesting, super powerful, stuff like that?
Honestly, at that time, I don't believe I was following the Japanese meta very closely.
Okay.
I don't remember why, but I did like explore it retroactively.
Mhm.
Like afterwards, I watched the interview with WF. Is that the name of the second place
Yep.
player? Yeah, and he explained how his thinking process for the finals was. I don't remember the exact channel for the interview. I'll see if I can find it, and
That's
maybe Kai
It
Kai can link
actually
it in the
might be linked
description.
by Kai
it. It
because
is. It
Kai.
is my channel.
Oh, okay. Okay. That makes things way simpler. And yeah, he
Yeah.
said like he was not expecting a lot of people to catch on to the fact that green purple was so good because like it wasn't publicly known. But then it turned out a lot of people figure it out independently, and then there was a lot more green purple Luffy in the tournament and in the top cut than people expected. And to me, that type of meta development, like when you come into a tournament, is super scary because all these decks that you potentially prepared for the expected meta now might be completely off. So yeah, I think people made some weird choices, but not everybody expected the same meta. So it's like it's difficult to
100%.
judge. Like it was completely unknown.
Yeah.
But Luna didn't surprise me as much. Chopper did because Chopper kind of it can be a huge liability.
That's true.
100%. The one time that Chopper isn't a straw hat in the entire show, basically.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I
So
mean.
to be honest, when I first saw the leader, I was expecting maybe some film straw hat focus, like with the
Mm,
green core from way back in OPO2, which was maybe optimistic. Those cards are, in a sense, very outdated. As we see
mhm.
now, they're not pretty much played except for maybe the 2K Sanji. But yeah, I'm glad there's some creativity to be found in a limited like straw hat only pool.
100%. I might be able to provide a little bit more context about how the meta developed kind of in the intermediary because China is a little bit after Japan in
mm,
terms of release schedule, but it's before the English meta. Um, I do not speak Chinese. I cannot read for the most part, but I have reached out to a few people that can like or have been looking at it very extensively, and they kind of reached very similar conclusions that Japan did with a few kind of modifications. And I think the main things that they looked at was the prevalence of Shanks and Lucci in their format. Um, Shanks kind of being a deck that was relatively reasonable as a more aggro core that we have played recently in OPO10. But people kind of went back to a much more controlling version of Shanks to try to beat this green purple Luffy menace. Just because like I'll talk about the deck as a core in a little bit, but like removing the 7K bodies are just so prevalent. So drawing any number of ways to remove a 7K is actually quite reasonable when they have no real protection against it. They do have cards like Marigo to protect against cost unconditional effects, but not against power. So cards like Mulgun or like Building Snake to reduce power are all quite good against green purple. Um,
right.
so going into like this NA meta, green purple looks like the deck to beat as this like really powerful in terms of what the deck looks like at its core. It's I think of it as a 12 card deck. I might be kind of biased in how it works, but I think the main like three cards that matter in the deck are the 5-cost Sanji Pudding, the 6-cost as Secret Luffy, and then Gum Gum Giant, the bane of
Mm,
OP11. We'll talk about that later. And I do think a lot of that deck's existence relies on those characters living for a turn or two. Um, and a lot of decks that have kind of existed in the metagame to kind of counter it can kind of either remove that card or invalidate those cards, or remove those cards or invalidate those cards in the course of the game. Um, the main thing that we've kind of talked about a little bit is just decks that are able to remove Sanji Pudding, Shanks and Lucci as like the two main prevalent ones. Have you guys tried those, or Hrvoje, have you tried those decks at all? Do you think they're pretty promising? Do you think they're good enough against Purple Luffy to bring into a tournament in this next couple of weeks?
I do think they are.
mm,
I tested most of the Lucci matchup. I did not like go all in on Shanks, but Red Forest Shanks does have a very nice way, like extra ways to out Sanji Pudding besides the event. And honestly, I was not happy with like my win rate on the green purple side. To be fair, I tested most of the time without Luffy Taro, which probably swings the matchup a decent bit. But I do think like removing Sanji Pudding is probably the safest way to try to shut the deck down, but you need to do it like efficiently. You need to set up bodies and so like proactively. You have to be able to kill green purple Luffy's board or him. And I also think this kind of ties into the other potential weakness of the deck, which is like a lot of the deck is on counters, the way it's built right now popularly. And you can if you're on an aggressive deck which can like cheat out bodies early, like just do it faster than green purple gets to its ideal setup. You don't actually even need to remove the Sanji Pudding to win those games. Like you can get blown out by Luna, but decks like Lim, like Reiju, they can just like put the pressure on so fast and cheat out the bodies faster than green purple, because green purple has a dynamic I think is somewhat similar to red purple law, where at least to the red purple we played, because we never got Black Maria with the leader legal, where you kind of have to take those few turns slow, like, and not use leader ability until turn 3, turn 4, depending on your hand. And in that time, decks which can like cheat out like 5k, 6ks in early turns, they can just like completely go ham on you. And if you're caught on that hand with a lot of non-counters, where you're giving 2ks to counter a 6k swing into your 6k leader, or even worse, 5k to 5k, you can just completely lose the game before it even really began for you. So yeah, I do think the most popular way to attack the decks is going to be with like Shanks and Lucci, because you just remove Sanji Pudding, but there's also the way to maybe aggro it down, which is like Zora and Bell Betty, what they also try to do.
Yeah.
So I'm not even sure if I answered the question. I ranted a bit for
Yeah, you're good. What are your thoughts on those two decks? Like mostly like Shanks and Lucci going into this cut.
So I actually remember in EB02, there's a tournament. One of my friends holds a tournament almost weekly called the Shumai Cup, and one of the winners for the Shumai Cup, person that I talk about, or a tournament that I talk about a lot on my channel to talk about results and whatnot in the meta. One of the winners was a Red Shanks player that put in Red Force, as I think everybody was talking about before. And thanks to things like Red Force, Beckman, who can only reach 6,000 power, can now reach 7,000 power, and just that 7,000 power threshold is very important, especially against green purple Luffy.
Yeah.
So I experimented a bit with Shanks at that time. I thought Red Force was really fun, even in OP09 before. What is it? Green purple Luffy became like
popular.
Yeah, like an actual meta threat, just because when anything's rested, being able to reduce by 1,000 power seemed pretty significant to me. Ended up not getting into the final list, but I'm glad that it now has a justifiable reason to be run, especially, with cards that have rush. That effect, just being a -1,000, does have some sort of relevancy, even if you're not trying to clear the board. Lucci, on the other hand, I can't really speak on too much, just because we had Lucci with 8 cost Moria and Ice Age, so it's a bit of a different world. Not only that, but Japan, it seems like Blackbeard's a significantly more popular deck. So anytime that Lucci seems slightly popular, then all of the Blackbeard players kind of appear out of nowhere and the play rate shoots up to like 10% again. Makes it hard for Lucci to exist. It's one of those weird things. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think these like control decks are quite reasonable. These are KO decks, but they definitely have their flaws. Mainly like Blackbeard is like a weird thing to kind of think about in that kind of condition. Or like if you try to bring a bunch of Shanks and Luccis, then maybe the Blackbeard decks will come out of nowhere or come out of the woodworks and start beating you. And I think Blackbeard's a reasonable contender in this upcoming meta.
Yeah, especially if you're if you're focusing on the KO version of Shanks, where you play a lot slower, you play things like even the 10 cost KO Shanks. That's not really what you want to have against Blackbeard. So it's one of those
100%.
things. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about a different strategy that might work against green purple. I know we're kind of talking about the lens of green purple, but I think it's kind of what everyone's going to be working on in this meta, and trying to beat it's kind of be the #1 Pokemon, but trying to go underneath it and trying to be relatively aggressive. I think Hrvoje correctly identified that like being super aggressive against this deck, if you have the tools to keep barraging for like 6s nonstop, can really be good against a deck that plays a lot of non-counters. And I think the average deck for green purple plays at minimum like 26 non-counters, if not more. So it can definitely scale in terms of like these 6s being very, very difficult. the most popular like aggro deck that existed in Japan to beat it, it seemed like was Zoro, with like a little bit of Bello Betty to exist to kind of beat it. That's a little bit more top heavy. But yeah, I think Lim can go underneath it. I think sometimes Dofi can go underneath as well. And decks like Reiju as well. Just doing an infinite number of sixes can be very, very difficult for this deck to beat. Are those decks seeming promising to you? I know a lot of these green purple decks play Luna, and that card's probably at its best against these aggro variants. Do you think it's enough to win these matchups, or is it like kind of close? What are your thoughts on that, Hrvoje?
So for most decks, yeah, the Luna. If you see two Lunas, you usually log them out of the game unless you go really low and don't have Giant to defend yourself from like Serena Luffy or Rush in general against Zoro. With Lim specifically, I do think there's the problem that sometimes she just has the one cost into like Tabo, into Dofi, into Trico Slim, and suddenly her entire board restands every turn while hitting your sixes. And if you don't have enough counter, you will like if you manage to outlast that initial barrage, you're going to be in a good position. But if you're unable to do so, like you're just dead, even if you do like Sea Giants and Lunas at a later point because you only have like one or two Luna targets. In general, I do think it is like the biggest flaw of the deck, and in fact, it reminds me of a deck building problem I had way back in OPO3 with the Whitebeard Pirate Zoro after the ban list, where like the deck lost a lot of defensive tools. It only had like one Blocker Marco, one Radical Beam, and we noticed in testing like there was a lot of situations where we just didn't have the 1k. Like there would be a 5k swing, and we'd be like, oh, do we give a 2k? Do we counter with event? Because the 1k count was so low in the deck, and we solid batting like some subpar cards. I think it was Forza, Haruta, and
Oh yeah.
something else, Flamenco, and it ended up working quite well in that format. And I think maybe a lot of decking in green purple might go in that direction where you just find these like good enough 1Ks to fill the spots. Because honestly, green Zoro is not that good of a card. Honestly, like it has its spots where it really shines, but for the most part, it feels like my favorite 1K. Because you would always rather play Zoro Juro or something like that, right? And Chopper kind of feels the same because it can be a huge liability. But yeah, finding space for those 1Ks to make sure you don't get aggro down, I think might be it depends on how popular the aggro decks in the meta are, but it might be a good way to ensure you like have a stable tournament with green purple. Even not even just against aggro decks, but in the mirror as well. Because sometimes you get like counter checked in the mirror on your board and then it sucks.
Yeah. Go ahead,
I'm
Kai.
I'm not entirely convinced that those sorts of extremely aggressive decks, especially decks like Zoro, or I mean, you mentioned for a little bit Doflamingo, but I'll talk about that in a bit, actually counter or beat Green Purple Luffy, just because in a way Green Purple Luffy is a 6,000 power base leader, but unlike someone like Red Purple Luffy or Blue Purple Luffy, he has 4 life and not 3. So he has a lot of resources to work with. And that with the fact that he has things like Gum Gum Giant to work with and Electrical Luna, which if he's taking for the mirror, for sure he runs probably like 3, potentially 4. And Green Purple Luffy, at least initially in EB02, as we were talking a little bit briefly about the WF interview, kind of appeared as a counter to Blue Doflamingo. So I'm actually kind of surprised that it's still the deck to beat, given that Blue Doflamingo is no longer as prevalent as it used to be.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree. I don't think Dofi is particularly good against it. But I do think if you try to build green purple in a way such that you're over-attacking too much for matchups like Shanks or Lucci, and you just draw 2 or 3 Luffy Taros, you're in a those games are a lot tougher. It's a little bit scarier to play. So I do think trying to beat all these things as this kind of like best deck is kind of difficult because all these tech cards you're trying to include to beat different matchups really add on to the number of non-counters you play. But yeah, I agree that I don't think these aggro matchups are that bad. We played in a event in Japan right before the 3v3 where I was playing green purple for the first time, and I played against Zoro twice in that event, and I did win one and lose one. That matchup did feel quite complicated to navigate though, just because Luna obviously is one of your best cards, but you kind of have to figure out how to apply enough pressure, how to race against these like aggro decks for the most part, but you're able to do so a lot of the time. So I do think that those matchups can be close, but I do think they're slightly favorable for the most part for the green purple deck. But you do need to make sure that your counter situation's in the right spot, because if you're whiffing on one particular turn, I think it's lights out.
That's fair. Yeah, I do have a question, kind of,
Shoot.
because we're kind of talking in the pretense that green purple Luffy is going to be the strongest deck, but isn't your OP10 meta pretty isn't Shanks already pretty prominent? And I feel like that's one of the worst matchups for green purple Luffy. Do you think that the OP10 meta going into EB02 is actually going to change too much? Because sorry, my perception was that the current OP10 meta, with things like Lucci still kind of existing, Shanks being, at least from what I've seen, very high play rate, and also these sorts of aggro decks just kind of randomly existing, like Lim or Zoro, just people believing in these decks. Even, for example, Bonney existing, 8-cost kid decks also do quite well into Green Purple Luffy. Do you actually think that Green Purple Luffy is going to be the deck to beat?
So for me personally, I do think so, mostly because I think that Shanks has the same deck building issues that Green Purple does. Not regarding consistency. I think Green Purple is a much more consistent deck,
Right.
but regarding concessions they have to make for different matchups. I don't think Shanks can build its deck to be good against this Green Purple deck, playing cards like Red Force, playing a lot more KO effects, while also being able to beat the Blackbeards of the format. And I think that currently in OPO10, in my opinion, like the two most popular decks or the two most prevalent decks are like Shanks, Blackbeard, and then having like Purple Luffy like a little bit underneath it. And it's like really easy to build a Shanks deck that has a lot of rushers to try to beat the Blackbeard deck. So that's really what the main concern is. But if Green Purple ends up becoming your predominant concern, I don't think you can make both work. So that's why I'm a little bit low on Shanks in that regard. Additionally, I don't really like how inconsistent Shanks is, even with the new song that came out in EB02. I don't think it's worth playing.
Right.
So there's just a lot of inconsistency issues with Shanks, regardless of whether you're playing the aggro version or the control version, and you kind of had to hit the right matchup lottery, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that, Hrvoje?
Yeah, so I agree with the idea that Shanks and Teach are like the best decks, just because they have most of the strongest cards on their own, like in a vacuum. They have like some of the best cards in the format, but the way the format has developed has been, I don't know, puzzling to look at, because these are the two perceived best decks. But then in OPO10, the decks that won in Europe, which were all offline events, so with Top Cut, it was first a Lim, then it was the Flamingo, then it was Lucci, and then it was Reiju. And when you look at that list of decks, it doesn't really make sense that these decks can navigate the brackets of Shanks and Blackbeard. But the format does have a large amount of randomness. And I think what Green Purple is going to do is it's going to make a lot of top players gravitate towards the deck, because it is the perceived best pick. And just by nature of it being played by a lot of top players, it is going to perform a lot better than something like Shanks would, because there is a skill to reward ratio, which I think is much less present in Shanks. And on the other hand, you're going to have a lot of people wanting to counter it, but I believe the people, the top players who want to counter it with a Lucci or Shanks, are going to be way fewer in numbers than top players who just say, okay, let's play Green Purple Luffy, it's the best deck. Especially because in Europe it's only going to be, I think, 2 events, so it's kind of are you really going to risk it for an event or 2 and try to counter the best deck, or just bring the best deck? So I don't think it will be the strongest deck of the format in a way Sakazuki or OP08 Law in Japan were, but it's going to be something that completely warps the meta around it, where you either play it, either respond to it, and it's in everybody's conscience that you have to play the tournament with this deck in mind. But is it going to win every event? I'm not sure, because I feel like we will still remain in a bit of a jungle, because there's just so many strong decks.
Right.
Yeah. Let's kind of talk about another different strategy that you also mentioned, Kai, ACOS Kid. the two main prevalent ones that we're expecting are probably just Bonney and then Red Green Smoker, the one that won the Asia finals. But I know you were also trying out a blue green Rosinante deck that has piqued my interest. I'm also going to want to try. What are your guys' thoughts on like Ecos Kid strategies against green purple? I know there's cards to kind of like beat them, cards like Gamma Knife or maybe 6-cost Brook if you like it. But do you think those decks are going to be good again in this meta? Do you think they're going to be good against green purple? What are your guys' thoughts?
So I didn't actually play green purple Luffy as much as I maybe would have liked to. I was kind of busy during EB02. So one of my opinions might actually come from an answer that I'm going to ask you right now. But how did 6-cost Brook feel in the mirror for you?
It is quite bad, but it's a 1K.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because
that's the main thing. Yeah.
Because my idea was that in the mirror, when you're trying to fight for boards, it's hard to rest your 5-cost 7,000 Sunjin puddings if they have Brook on the board. But if that's not actually really a factor, then I guess 6-cost Brook is basically just for 8-cost Kid. So then my logic would be that 8-cost Kid decks are only as good as its play rate. So if there's a lot of 8-cost Kid decks, then it becomes worse because then Green Purple Luffy can easily tech for it. Whereas if it's a very lower play rate, then Green Purple Luffy can't justify teching for it with things like Gamma Knife or things like 6-cost Brook. And therefore the stocks for that deck become a bit higher. So I feel like it's very reliant on the surrounding meta rather than actually how good the deck is in isolation against Green Purple Luffy.
What
Yeah,
are your
I
thoughts?
think-
Go ahead.
Yeah, the biggest problem of green kid decks is going to be that like both Smoker and Bonney kind of get bodied by Shanks. And if Shanks is already taking like power reduction tools to deal with Sanji pudding, such as Mulgan or Red Force, now that like indirectly hurts every green deck in the meta as well. So they're like again playing this game of where you cannot build for everything, and the deck you want to beat is like the perceived best deck. So you're losing a lot of points into Shanks. And the worst part is that perceived best deck can still take very hard for you, because I think Gamma Knife on its own is like for the cost you pay for it, it's an absurdly powerful card because it lets you just swing tempo completely. And we have seen that with like multiple purple decks throughout the format. So yeah, I would not put too high of a hope on any of the kid decks.
Yeah. I'm not a super huge fan of the green or the kid decks based on kind of what you said, Kai and Hrvoje, just because I think if it's too popular, both green purple can tech for it, but also the counters we've talked about for green purple are actually just like naturally quite good against kid decks. Both Shanks and Lucci can kind of line up pretty well. Like if your opponent has Kuzan and 3-cost Brook and you're just playing green characters, it's been a miserable experience since OPO7. So yeah, I'm also not a huge fan of these, but I was commentating an Eggman event the other day, and Bonney did end up winning. So it's a very powerful deck. If you kind of have a lot of good matchups, it is a quite good deck, and it is still good even after almost or 11 sets of nonstop stuff coming out.
Yeah, I do think, at least regarding 8-cost Kid decks, I would personally consider Bonney as one of the weaker ones, just because it only plays around 8-cost Kid, I feel. It has a very defensive plan, stabilizes the board, and then pushes back with 8-cost Kid. It doesn't really have any other options, whereas someone like Red Green Smoker also has the option to go very aggressive by just spamming things like the 5-cost Smoker as well as 7-cost Hody. So if there's an 8-cost Kid deck, I would personally rate something like Red Green Smoker a bit higher. I would need to test Rosinante into that meta to actually know how it would do into these other sort of matchups, because I know it does bad into Lucci, but because of Vanderdecken, it might not do as bad into Shanks compared to the other decks. So there are some things to consider, but it is always going to be one of those walls where red control decks generally do beat out 8-cost Kid decks.
Makes sense. So the next like bucket of decks I want to talk about are decks I actually don't think are that good against green purple, but they just like kind of go over the top of a lot of the other decks that exist. So that come to mind are like Blackbeard, Enel, and then Vegapunk to a lesser extent. Of these like decks that just want to grind games out of resources and eventually just win the game with some huge boss monsters. But I think a lot of them in general aren't particularly great against the green purple decks that are coming out. Have you guys like experimented or thought about any of these decks? Do they seem promising for you guys?
I basically only played
Well,
Vegapunk for EB02. So I can talk a lot about that, but it might be one of the more minor topics, so we can get around to that after we talked about the other ones.
Okay. And Hrvoje?
So for Enel, I haven't touched the deck in quite a while, and I will believe whatever you say because you're the Enel expert here. For Teach and Vegapunk, relative to their Teach, it's always going to be like there's this best deck in the meta, and you have a really bad matchup into it. You're so reliant on resolving a good liberation to catch up, and that part is already so unappealing to me. It does have a good matchup, a good predicted matchup into a lot of the decks that are supposed to beat out green purple Luffy, obviously Lucci and Shanks. But then you also get punished by some of the decks which try to beat out green purple Luffy by aggression. So I'm not too hyped about Blackbeard before the starter deck support. And as for Vegapunk, limited testing, I will probably expand on it much more. 5-cost Vegapunk is an insane card for grind game. The fact that you can resolve it multiple times per game, like the same copy, it's quite instant. I don't know, it's just such a good piece of support. But Vegapunk still feels to me like a deck where if you are good at playing against Vegapunk, then it doesn't actually make that much of a difference. Like, it has that cheat factor in a sense, but against good players who have practiced the matchup, like you need to know what to do, you're still going to be in a decent position. So I don't know, if I had to pick any of the 3 decks to actually bring to the tournament, it would probably still be Blackbeard, just on the hope that Liberations can get me there. Probably like 3 Liberations main deck.
Especially regarding Enel, it feels like that new 10-cost Enel that was printed is basically made for him to be able to fight with Blackbeard better. You know, it's has an on-attack effect, doesn't have an on-play effect, has rush immediately, can hit at 12k despite being an 11k body for basically just annoying the 10-cost Blackbeard, but it still doesn't fix the matchup. So it's one of those things where, and now he has to worry about green purple Luffy as well, which I don't necessarily think is like a terrible matchup for NL, but it's not easy because green purple Luffy can just kind of swarm the board, overwhelm you with really high power attacks. So it's one of those things where NL, I think, as a deck is much more powerful right now, and if there's ever a meta where NL can shine, he will really shine. But just given the fact that we have these other moving pieces within the meta that make it a bit difficult for NL to be alive, probably might not see him, but that doesn't mean that he's not a bad deck. Or it doesn't mean that he is a bad deck.
I have a little bit of yellow cope that's lingering in my blood right now, just because I think they kind of have reasonable matchups into the rest of the format. So we've kind of talked a little bit about the 1-cost purple stage, but Marigo is actually quite an annoying card against yellow, and also against black decks, just because the +2 cost is actually a very difficult thing to get around when you're playing these like control variants, because you really need to remove the Sanji pudding, and you can't really do so with the tools available. Like a 7-cost Sanji pudding can't be removed by any card until like 8 Dawn from yellow, and requires a lot of resources from decks like Blackbeard to remove. It'd be like the Shigan or Finger Pistol plus like a Stronger or something, which is a lot of resources. Or Liberation that we talked about, which kind of bypasses the +2 cost effect. But I do think that aside from that, Enel can gum up the ground and slow the game down to the point that cards like 10-cost Enel that we talked about, cards like 8-cost Katakuri, and all these other like really top-end cards to deal with board can eventually grind a game down if the green-purple deck doesn't have the resources to compete, which is mostly cards like Luffy Taro and 6-cost Luffy. Enel still always has that luck factor, hitting 0-cost events, hitting trigger blockers out of life, which is always the dream, but that doesn't always come up. But I do think that between all those like ways to slow the game down, plus Bram that's become a little bit more popular recently to kind of get rid of 1-cost stages, can give Enel a lot of tools to kind of at the very least interact with green purple. And then additionally, I do think a lot of the cards in yellow are going to be good against Shanks and Lucci. Recently in OP10, the cards like 8-cost Kid, the yellow one that can make him trash life, and a lot more aggressive top-end cards are just going to be good against decks that are kind of slowing the game down. Additionally, all these blockers are going to be good against cards like Rush Shanks from Shanks as well. So I'm going to be trying it a lot more moving forward, and I think it's pretty promising. But I think fundamentally, if green purple does its thing as it wants to every turn, it's going to be hard to play against when you're playing Enel. So.
Yeah, the games that feel the easiest as green purple are the ones where you just see all the Sanji puddings you need, and like even if they remove the first one, you have the second one, maybe that one sticks, and then it's
Yeah.
pretty much cruising from there. But yeah, and Enel did get sucker punched by the ban list. That's like the main things I remember, because the 10-cost Enel, it was so good if you could like play it and then next turn you Raigo and then swing Enel, and you got both the heal and the removal, and now his options are so limited in comparison. But
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's still one of those things. I feel bad that they banned Raigo, but
Bring it back.
yeah.
Are there any other EB02 new archetypes or decks that you guys want to talk about? I kind of just talked about things in buckets, but if there's anything else that's super interesting for you guys.
I mean, we still haven't talked too much about Vegapunk, and I think that
Yeah,
Vegapunk is a very interesting deck. I don't think that it necessarily beats Green Purple Luffy, despite all of its characters being 6,000 power. But I think it goes 50-50, regardless of if you go first or second, most of the time.
okay.
And so Vegapunk's an interesting deck, where if the opponent has no idea how to play against Vegapunk, you'll win like 60%, 70% of the time default. And a lot of times people don't know how to play against Vegapunk. So I think in a weird way, it's one of those things where it works once, and in like one regional, you play Vegapunk against someone, they have no idea what happens. They go back, figure out what they're supposed to do, and it doesn't work again. But a lot of times you just need one shot, so I enjoy Vegapunk a lot. But Vegapunk's this weird deck where, first of all, he's the only 2 life leader in the game, and he also only has 5,000 power. But he can heal himself, but he can also put the character to board. And the most normal kind of default strategy for Vegapunk has always been to play a control style where you keep putting the cards to life, which is basically a one-time infinite counter on any attack. And these cards obviously have trigger most of the time as well. So not only do you defend an attack, but it also comes out onto the board. But in EB02, kind of as a meta response, but also due to the fact that we got this new 5-cost Vegapunk to play with, it's become a much more aggressive deck where the highest end card that you run, if you do run it, is either 8-cost Kid. If you don't run it, is probably going to be the 5-cost Rush Ace. And what you do with this deck now is, because you can play any 5-cost or less to the board for only 1 cost, from, let's say, if you have 4 Dong, you could play a 3-cost and a 5-cost, or from 6 Dong, you could play a 5-cost and a 5-cost. And in this way, by turn 3, if Vegapunk, everything goes well for him, he could have an entire board full of 5 and 6k characters, which is really hard to deal with for many, many decks. I honestly think that even against Shanks, it has 50-50, maybe slightly losing matchup, but the number of 6k attacks, making it so that Shanks' leader effect is a bit weaker, also has a decent role within that matchup as well. So Vegapunk, in this aggro variant, because he's not adding the cards to his life, has the risk of dying. Because if, for example, you don't have Shaka and the opponent just hits into your life a couple of times, you don't really have the resource to defend. The deck generally doesn't run that many counter cards anyways, because it has this free life card. So what the deck has always needed is consistency and finding your blocker, which was always Shaka. And by having the new 5-cost Vegapunk, not only does it give you a new way to find Shaka, it also just is a blocker on its own, which means that it's also a good Quasar target. And so this one card increased the consistency of Vegapunk, made it much easier to be aggressive because it gives you more blockers that don't need to rest themselves to attack, and also make your defense a lot higher too, because it just gives you a lot more Shaka. So the deck is significantly better than it was in OP10. That being said, it's not necessarily winning into any sort of like really prominent meta matchup except for Blackbeard. So a lot of it will come down to the opponent's matchup knowledge as well as your skill at the deck. Sorry, I went on for a little
Yeah,
while
no,
there.
you're good. Now I gotta figure out. I gotta put some more testing into this deck. It's something that's always been on the back of my mind.
I think it cannot be overstated how good that Vegapunk super is. By the way, it might just be the best card in the set, because when you think about it, it's like the yellow Rebecca. Like, it creates this body, but detaches the blocker part from the body, and it's still like, it effectively becomes a 0-cost
Yeah.
blocker if you played out but it's not a 0 cost, it's like a 5 cost, so it's way more difficult to remove. But yeah, Vegapunk, yeah, I think it will catch people off guard because a lot of people do not test like these niche matchups, especially in metas as wide as this. But I think there's still a few more decks which will definitely surprise people, and I would not be surprised even to see them win an event. I think the first one on my mind is Nami, because when you see like slow Shanks build, or even just Shanks in general in the meta, and Lucci, Nami pops up as like a really easy way to farm those leaders. Of course, she does get countered by most of the stuff that you will bring to counter GP in an aggro way, but I've been also hearing that like she doesn't even have like a bad GP matchup. What I'm saying is we wait for Adam to play Nami at an event, and if he wins, we can just, we're not surprised because we knew she had the potential there. But also, like you mentioned with the Eggman Online tournament, we did get some of sneak peeks of the meta already in through these like webcams and tournaments. And today in Chinois, like Ruben, he hosted one of his weekly tournaments, and the winner was actually Red Purple Luffy by the Polish player Shichu. Sorry for the pronunciation. And he played a very interesting aggressive build with like a full Straw Hat engine and none of the usual like defensive top end options such as Whitebeard or Linling. He just ran like full rush, get to the 9-cost Luffy, and he ran Mulgans to take care of Sanji Pudding. And well, he won't even beat some green purple Luffys along the way. And that's another thing where you can just find this aggro angle to hit green purple Luffy too fast, even with the deck people don't expect. Or you can go like full control in an unexpected angle with like SD14 Luffy, where you just have this really efficient way to kill 5 costs. Like the options to specifically target green purple Luffy as a deck are endless. Like if you want to beat green purple Luffy, you have so many ways to do it, and in a way it's annoying because green purple Luffy player cannot prepare for it. But there's so many surprise picks you can bring, which still have like solid position in the meta against the rest of the decks. So we could talk about this all day, I think.
We can, yeah. I mean, you don't have a tournament this week, but Hrvoje, if you had a regional this weekend, what would you bring?
Definitely green purple Luffy. I think 2 Luffy Taros, no choppers, probably 3 green Zoros, and 3 Robins, 3 Lunas. No, I'm just giving you the ratios. Like it would be that type of list at this point in time, I believe. It will definitely be green purple Luffy. How about you? Or do you have a tournament actually?
I do have a tournament, and I think I'm very close to a lot of the conclusions you reached. The 3 Robins I agree with, the 3 wrestlers I agree with. I'm only on 1 Luffy Taro at the moment, but I think if you want to play 2, I think if you expect a lot of Shanks and Lucci, you could also do that as well. But a lot of just the same. Make sure you have plenty of counter in your deck. Just try to be as consistent as possible and keep doing green purple Luffy things. I'm fine with having a target on my head when I'm playing these kind of tournaments, just because another thing that green purple has going for it that we kind of haven't discussed is how confusing it is to play against. I really like Dofi back in OP09, mostly, or a large, or OP08 as well, just because of how many options you had and how confusing your combat could be to your opponents about whether you'd swing 6, whether you'd swing 7, or even just 8 with your leader. And having all those different options really made it difficult for your opponent to play around all of them. For green purple, your combat feels like that, but on a different level. I spent a lot of time just playing against Hrvoje when I was first in Japan trying to play this deck, just because when you have 8 Dawn and you play a Luffy, your opponent, unless they've played green purple Luffy very extensively, they just don't know what potential attacks you can have a lot of the time. Between like playing your character using leader effect, becoming bigger, getting extra Dawn, the kind of combinations of attacks you have are kind of endless, and it's really difficult to play against if you don't really know all the nuances of the deck extensively.
And it's not just the aggro, it's also like how far you can push the defensive aspect. Like, I'll just live for another turn, and I'll live for another turn. And like, that's a really easy thing to like be surprised by. Like, we played some BY and GP, and I was definitely surprised some games like you would just go, I think I'll play for another turn. And I'm like, this is Yonas. Like, he's probably not bluffing or testing. And yeah, you can just like survive hang on for like 2 or 3 extra turns compared to some other decks. Okay, 3 is extreme, but like 2 turns very often, And that also does remind me of like OP3 Zoro, where you would just like have all the radicals, all the Marcos. Like if you want to survive for quite a while, you get to do it. And as you said, there's like some sort of a liberating feeling when you play this deck that the perceived strongest because it's just strong, and then the onus is on your opponent to know what to do in most situations because you're the one who came prepared, and they're the ones who might not know everything that they should do, and now they're on the spot and not you.
Did you also have similar like growing pains trying to get familiar with how to play against green purple Kai? Trying to figure out what their lethal attacks would look like, trying to see like how you can play another turn or not.
Did like every time that like past the Tendon or something, the second that they start hitting with their first character, I have to start figuring out how much potential damage could come through. It's really difficult to actually like not only just figure out how you can kill Green Purple Luffy, because obviously they have Gum Gum Giant to make that very difficult, and their leader 6,000 base, which a lot of times you forget and swing 5k into.
Mhm.
But just the fact that they have their leader effect that restands Dong, Sanji Pudding that gives them Dong back. They could also have some random tech cards like the 2 cost
Green
Hound
event. We don't
Boys.
know the name either. Yeah.
Yeah, Makyusen Kiki, whatever. I don't know what it's called in English. Um, that can increase their power. It's really it's one of those things where the green purple Luffy player, especially if he puts in enough rounds, really understands his thresholds. Whereas if you're not practicing against green purple Luffy, the damage kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere because he puts 2 dong on a character, hits, and then suddenly he has an extra 3,000 power in attacks just from the 2 dong and his leader ability alone. It gets really complicated once he starts putting in events. He has things like 6 cost Luffy on the board. And just that factor that you need to calculate their damage to actually play optimally also, I think, adds a lot of power to that deck.
Yeah, I think that's one of the best parts, and like the offensive like onus on your opponent's like really difficult to do or figure out. But like Hrvoje mentioned, the defensive aspects are very very terrifying as well. I've won games with as little as like 4 cards in my hand with no blockers. Just because 1 or 2 Gum Gum Giants and a 2K later, I was able to survive out of a 15K swing. Um, there's a lot of potential to just grind games out and just solve games out just because you have some of the best offensive and defensive tools that this game's ever seen all in one deck.
Yeah, and not to mention that you can very consistently draw them. I think,
Yeah.
like, because you were mentioning that it's basically a 12-card deck, and I would almost like to call it a 4-card deck where it's just like Sanji Pudding or die. But it's one of those things where there's a lot of other decks that have existed in the past that are just 1-card decks, but it's been very gimmicky because if you don't draw it, you just lose. But because Green Purple Luffy has, I think it's 3 searchers, unless I'm
Yep.
missing one.
Yeah, 3.5 basically.
Yeah, kind of
Yep.
3.5. It's extremely consistent. You get Sanji Pudding on turn 3 like 90% of the time. It's like kind of overwhelming in that sense. And once he gets to that point where he sets up the board that he wants set up, then it's on the opponent to figure out how to deal with it.
Yeah, like between the new Nami searcher, the when we're at sea, we're fighting pirates searcher event. I think it's from OPO5 or 6, and then Zoro Juro. You kind of have those like 12 searchers to kind of very consistently find your Sanji Pudding, and then also the stage drawing a card kind of gives you the extra half searcher that you can.
Yeah, you know, I meant the Nico Robin because you're not always gonna search with it when you block, but you do have the option, like
That's true.
especially
Yeah.
when you want to go down and done to get the draw.
Let's call even 4 then. You got plenty of ways to draw plenty of cards.
I mean, also your Sanjin Pudding, if the opponent has equal or less Dong than you, then he also draws a card. I think there's just Zoroshiro and Sanji Pudding are both vanilla stat line characters that can recycle the resources in their hand. So the deck just has a lot of power because they're vanilla stat line characters. He has a lot of Dong to be able to play a lot of them very quickly. And they redraw cards. He has access to Gum Gum Giant. The deck's just extremely resilient, and also thanks to the fact that his leader effect is very versatile, just gives him a lot of tools to be able to fight the opponent on the board on his terms.
Yeah, the vanilla set line really sells it in many cases. Like when you test green purple mirror and then you move from like that to green purple against like a normal leader, and suddenly your 7K guys are hitting for 2K above their leader. Like, whoa, like this is just insane. Because in mirror, it's like sure they can give a 2K, or you have to attach Dawn and make your turns a bit clunky. It really depends. But then you play against a normal deck, and you're like 7-5, 7-5, 7-5, and it's like, yeah, that's just like insane aggro. We take those, and you basically get it for free because the stat lines are there.
100%. Yeah. So, any other like topics you guys want to talk about involving this current EBO2 set? Any other cards that you want to give a shout out to that just got printed, or a lot more exciting to play in this format?
I need to take one more look at it, but there's some cards, for example, like the 7-cost Sengoku that they
Mhm.
printed, which I don't necessarily think is that powerful yet, but is a card to kind of look at for the future, where the more support that they start to print will make that card stronger and stronger. If we're looking at cards right now, I think that secret rare 6-cost Luffy, although it's mostly just a card in green purple Luffy, it also buffs red purple Luffy as well as purple black Luffy, and that's just kind of fun because it gives more aggressive options to these decks as well.
Yeah, as a whole, I think EBO2 honestly was a bit of a disappointment of a set, just because across the board the power level of cards is so low, and when it's like this new set, especially compared to how EBO1 was, you would hope for like higher impact, because a lot of the super rares either like support very weak archetypes, or they're just not that good cards themselves. But I think there's a few cards which are like notable in that they will add power to these existing decks. First is obviously now it's running green purple Luffy, but the green army searcher like opens up a lot of possibilities, because as soon as you have something that searches straw hats in this game, you know they're the most popular archetype. They're gonna be here for a while, and she's a block 3 searcher, so she's staying for like 3 or 4 years or whatever. And that's one of those cards you'll just have to keep in the back of your mind for a while. Even like the red green wall now has 2 Nami searchers.
Right.
But there's also the yellow Sanji. Um, I'm not sure how long he will stick around, because we have seen spoilers from OPO12. There's the crazy Sabo coming out.
Mhm.
But he is generically just a really nice card to have in late game. Like, he's a blocker that replaces himself. I'm forgetting something. There was something really. Oh yeah, okay. Sengoku. First of all, I already really like it. I think it's really good for like ST14 Luffy. I think there's definite merit to running it in Lucci, because I think every Lucci is going to be on 4 Kuza now, 3 or 4 Hina, and I think with Sengoku you can just, because it's top end with counter, it's very safe to run, and it can allow you a lot of flexibility if you just add like a copy of Kobe or two. And yeah, I just think it adds like really great angles to existing black decks. And I forgot what the last card was.
There's a couple of
Oh,
other
you're good.
random SRs that they printed, like the 6-cost Yamato, I think, or was it Ulden? I think it's Yamato.
Yeah.
The 7-cost Bonney. Those cards, I don't really like Bonney. I know there's a couple of Bonney players saying that it was good just because you want a decent mid-game stat line. But things like the Ulden and forget what the other SRs were. Oh,
There's Arlong that I like as well.
There was a
right.
Vivi, which is like,
Vivi. Oh, I mean, Vivi seems like once she finds a deck that she works well in, she could be very good because it is kind of peel off with 1000 counter. And I thought that there's a lot of decks that I thought it would fit into, but it just kind of barely hasn't made the cut a lot of times. So I'm just curious when we're going to see a deck that can actually use Vivi well. I do think that card's very powerful though.
Yeah, I also think it's quite powerful. But yeah, there's not really a multicolored deck that can use that body particularly well. A lot of the decks that can bounce it repeatedly are just monocolored and would use cards like Four Cost Law very well. So
Yeah.
there's no real overlap in terms of multicolored warlords.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is true. There is green blue Zoro and Sanji, which is
Mhm.
a deck that can use it quite well. The one problem is that you're forced to play Zoro and Sanji. So there is that. But not to say that the deck's that terrible. It's just kind of it does one thing, and that one thing isn't necessarily as strong as what other aggressive decks try to do.
Yeah, I would agree. Trying to think of what other cards have opened in my case and been
I
very
cheated and I
underwhelming.
just opened the card list to remember, but the blue Rosinante, I think, Well, first of all, the Fishman thing, like in the green Bull Rosinante, he's obviously the log, but I think that archetype in general. I said this in my set review with Christian when we did it. That is a card archetype, like a 2-cost searcher in the way that Bonney and Luffy and all those exist. Just the prospect of those existing is to me really exciting. Like this one specific is locked to one leader so far because the other Rosinante we're getting is yellow purple. But to me, that as a design decision is like one of the most exciting things in the set, which is also a bit sad because that's just how low power the set is. There's like 5 or 6 notable cards, but well, outside of the green purple stuff.
Yeah. I mean, the weird thing, if we look back at EB01 in Japan, EB01 was kind of terrible as well. People weren't playing like Animal Zoro, so the 3-cost chopper didn't really mean anything. 3-cost Brook was significant, but things like Laboon, I don't even remember the other cards, but a lot of the time it felt like the most prevalent card from EB02 was actually Raigo and not actually any of the SRs. And then it eventually happened to that over time, people started rating the EB01 cards higher and higher. Things like Cavendish, of course, were printed in that set. So it turned out to be a very powerful set, but it kind of had a slow start in Japan.
Might have a very mirrored experience. Maybe some random cards like Yamato or the 5-cost blocker law end up being very popular or very powerful in different decks that come out.
Yeah, we'll see. I don't know.
Fingers crossed.
that 5-cost law, I was really confused when they printed that, given that things like a 5-cost Sabo already exist for Dressrosa. But you know, it has some merits over Sabo in some cases. So maybe someday.
Awesome.
It's like I don't think it's ever seen play. I'm sorry, it just
a man can hope. It's law, and law Altar I just want to see play at some point. But yeah, it's not
maybe if there's like a law kid like they did it for BY Luffy, like the 3 brother kids, maybe they make a law kid that can summon 5-cost laws and then maybe run this. That's the only thing I can say, because there's gonna be black yellow Dressrosa later. So
the time to tell Bandai to start making this happen. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I mean, I'll never say no to plus 2k to my leader for 2 turns. Like balanced mechanic. What can I say?
That is fair. Any other talking points that you guys want to jump on today?
I don't think so. I think we covered it pretty well.
Yeah, I will just apologize to the viewers again for I believe my subpar audio. I did try to like when I saw the comments on the first video, it was already late, like 9 p.m. and I tried to borrow a microphone, but I couldn't get it to work. So I'll get something for the next week for you guys to make sure it works. And I'm glad you stayed to watch until the end.
Yeah, it was a fun time to talk about EB02 today. Talking a lot about Green Purple Luffy as a whole, all the different matchups, and all the different popular decks we might want to consider for this tournament or these upcoming tournaments. Yeah, it was a great time. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe down below, though. Shout out to Kai's channel. It's been a super fun time interacting with people there. And I'm looking forward to next week where we're probably going to talk about some OPO12 spoilers.
Yeah, that'll be fun. I can take you to my realm now.
Yeah, should be a good
because
time.
Kai doesn't brag, all this amazing design you see for the whole bull on the podcast, his work.
You're good. The perfect shout out. Just cut off.
Yeah. It is what it is. He can leave like a still frame of him while I do the talking.
You're good.
Unless the audio is like all together. I'm not sure if he said he's recording his microphone together or separately from ours. I'm not sure if I was cutting off while we were recording, just because my ping sometimes it would spike to like 8,000 or something, like or 800.
I didn't notice
not
anything
8,000.
too crazy, to be honest. So you should be fine.
Yeah.
Okay, we're good.
There we go.
I know it was like the last minute of our recording, but if I get the call, I need to answer it because otherwise they're not going to come pick up my stuff.
Oh, okay.
Because I got a TV for my mom because it was Mother's Day and our old TV's like completely broken. But it was a little bit bigger than I thought it was, so returning it once and then getting one that's the correct size after. But yeah, no, it was a little bit too big, so I need to return it. And I was talking to the company. But yeah. Anyways,
But anyways, where should we start this from? But we could just go from the beginning. Yeah. But thank you guys for listening today. Listening to our kind of EB02 conversation, talking about like Green Purple Luffy is the main deck, but all the different decks that exist in this current meta and how we can potentially beat them and what decks you might consider for upcoming regionals. I'm looking forward to kind of talking about next time where we talk about something in more Kai's realm, which is going to be some OPO12 spoilers. I'm super excited to talk about those. Those cards are super interesting going into this meta.
If you guys have stuff you want to hear, feel free to suggest it in the comments. We are always looking for new ideas.
And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe down below, everyone.
I don't
Thank you,
even have
guys.
to do any of the YouTube stuff. You guys just do it for me.
Of course.
Yeah.
Teamwork.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
Yeah. I guess I'll see you guys next
Jonas, good
time.
luck in the regional.
Viewers will
Yeah,
let us
and
know
see you
what
guys
other
next time.
comments you want to see. Bye-bye.
Awesome. Ooh, that was fun.